Assalamu alaikum to all our viewers. My name is Nazim Kazmi, and with me today is Sayyid Ali Imam and Sayyid Firdaus. This is the fourth show in our series responding to the allegations and the misstatements and the lies that Farid Bahraini has propagated in his video, which is circulating the net. Farid Bahraini has raised a number of points 3, 4, and 5, reports in the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shaybah and Al-Istiyab of Ibn Abdul and in other notable works within the Sunni literary world.
Point number 3, Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah. Here we have a report going to Aslam, the Mawla of Umar, and Aslam, the Mawla of Umar, was not an eyewitness, and therefore the report is disconnected. Point number 4, Ibn Abdul is quoting from Aslam. Once again, the report is disconnected. So it's the exact same report. These are not two independent sources. They're quoting the same source. Point number 5, the author of Kanz al-Ummal is actually quoting point number 3. It's the exact same thing. He actually mentions a sheen at the end of the report, meaning he's quoting point number 3, the author of point number 3, Musannaf ibn Abi Shaybah. So point number 5 and point number 3 is the exact same thing.
So with that, let me turn first of all to Sayyid Ali Imam. Sayyid, it'd be quite helpful if you could talk us through this and tell us, is this narration weak or authentic?
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you, brothers and sisters, for joining us. Now, before I get to the main point of discussion, I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of detail that goes into our shows, and at times they can become rather lengthy. So if you don't have the patience to sit there and listen to them, there is an option on YouTube that actually allows you to watch the video in a quicker pace. If you're watching this on mobile, all you need to do is just simply pause the screen. On the top right-hand corner, I believe, there's 3 buttons. If you select that, there should be an option on playback speed. So today, what we're going to be doing is we'll be continuing on with this discussion with another narration from one of the objections that was raised by Farid, which is a report found in Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shaybah. So we're going to analyze the report and the authenticity. We're going to see how Sunni scholars have attempted to distort this narration. Farid's objection is that Aslam is not a direct eyewitness, therefore this report is not authentic. Let's come to the report in Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shaybah and the scholars who've authenticated this report. This is from Ibn Abi Shaybah, narrated Muhammad ibn Bishr from Ubaydullah ibn Umar, from Zayd ibn Aslam, from his father Aslam, who said, after the Messenger of Allah passed away, when the allegiance was paid to Abu Bakr, Imam Ali and Zubair used to enter the house of Sayeda Fatima Al Zahra and discuss about their actions, meaning the usurping of the caliphate. When the news reached Umar ibn Khattab, he went out and entered the house of Sayeda Fatima Al Zahra. He said, O daughter of the Messenger of Allah, my most beloved is your father, and after him it's you. But by Allah, this love is not hindrance to me, that if these people got collected in your house, I will burn your house. Then he went out, and these people, i.e. meaning Ali and Zubair, came there. So Bibi Fatima Alayha told them, do you know Umar came to me and swore by Allah that if you returned, then he would burn down the house. And I swear by Allah that he would do that. He would do what he sworn. Then go reasonably and say your opinion and do not return to me. Then they went from her and did not return to her until they paid allegiance to Abu Bakr. This report is quite interesting because now, if you compare it to the reports we've mentioned in the previous episodes, either this occurred before or it was the same incident, but the details seem to be somewhat different to some of the issues and the points that was raised in the previous episodes. It's jumping events. There's a lot of unanswered questions, which, hopefully we can come to know later on. So this report has been authenticated by Saad ibn Nasr al-Shithri, who is a member of the Saudi Council of Senior Scholars, and he's also an advisor to the Royal Court of King Salman. So this individual is not a small individual. He's a major scholar, a contemporary scholar, and he's authenticated this report, which Farid claims is weak. The next report is in Ibn Abi Asim, narrated from Abu Bakr, from Ibn Abi Shaybah. So he's narrating it from Ibn Abi Shaybah, from Muhammad ibn Bishr, from Ubaydullah ibn Umar, from Zayd ibn Aslam, from his father, who said, the news reached to Umar ibn Khattab that some people have gathered in the house of Fatima Alayha. He went to her and said, O daughter of the Messenger of Allah, my most beloved is your father, and after him it was you. I was informed that these people, so these people, we don't know who these people are, have gathered in your house. But by Allah, if this is true, I will burn your house upon them. When they came, Fatima said, son of Khattab came and said so-and-so. We don't know, well, we know what he said, but for some reason it says so-and-so. And he would do what he has sworn. So they dispersed until they pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr. And this is from Al-Mudhakkar, page number 41. And Amr ibn Abdul Mun'im said this hadith is Sahih. This is another scholar, Shah Muhaddis Dehlawi. He has narrated this very report from Ibn Abi Shaybah, and he's narrated from Aslam, and he says, with the authentic chain according to the criteria of Shaykhain, meaning Muslim and Bukhari. And this is in his book Azalatul Khaifa, volume 4, page number 118. So this is Shah Muhaddis Dehlawi authenticating the same report from Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah. Here we've got 3 scholars now who've authenticated this report, which Farid claimed is weak. Now, in the book of Ibn Abi Shaybah, Kitab al-Maghazi, page number 45226-226, hadith number 12, in the annotator, Dr. Abdul Aziz ibn Ibrahim al-Umari, contemporary Salafi scholar who's a member of the Muhammad ibn Saud al-Islamiyah University, he authenticates this report, and he discusses the narrators of this report. He mentioned also Ubaydullah ibn Umar, who's one of the narrators of this hadith in Ibn Abi Shaybah, who ironically is also a descendant of Umar ibn Khattab. So it kind of goes to show you that if such a report is narrated from the progeny of Umar, what type of censorship would be involved when it comes to narrating this account. So he's very precise in authenticating this report. He doesn't say it's disconnected. And there is another report from Urwa, which he says that's disconnected. But for this particular report, he says it's a connected report. Another Saudi scholar, Farhan al-Maliki, and in his book, Kiratun fi Kutub al-Qaid al-Hanbali, page number 46. Now, when he discusses this report from Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah, he says the party of Ali was small in the time of allegiance to Umar and at the time of allegiance of Abu Bakr. In the early era of Abu Bakr, the division was due to the attack on the house of Sayeda Fatima. So he accepts this, he acknowledges this. And some companions who were with Ali alayhi salam did not like paying allegiance to Abu Bakr. And this is proven with authentic narrations. Authentic narrations. So he's not even saying it based on one narration. Then he says, I used to assume that this attack is a lie and not correct until I found strong chains for it. One of them is what Ibn Abi Shaybah has reported in his Musannaf through an authentic chain from Aslam, the slave of Umar, and others. This report is an authentic report, unlike what Farid claimed by suggesting that this is a weak report, showing the authentication from numerous scholars who've not only discussed the chains, but the fact that they've also said it's reported from other multiple narrators. And likewise, this report itself, there's some sort of distortion going on. You could see we don't get the full details of the actual event.
Thank you, Sayyid. That's extremely helpful and revealing, not only in relation to the distortions and obfuscations, but also the fact that a number of contemporary Saudi scholars, as well as some classical scholars, have actually verified that this is actually an authentic report in the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shaybah. It certainly contradicts Farid's assertions that the narration is not authentic at all. Either that or he's ignorant of Sunni scholarship. So, Sayyid Firdaus, if I could come to you, Sayyid Ali Imam's helpfully dealt with the first aspect of the objection, but Farid Bahraini raised an objection regarding the narrator, one specific narrator, Aslam. Could you tell us a bit about who he was whether he was a Sahabi or a Tabi, and have there been any other narrations taken from Aslam, or has he been rejected by anybody else?
Thank you, Sayyid Nazim Shah. Thank you also, Sayyid Ali, for mentioning those authentication of those scholars. I think it shows the weight that these kind of objections have for these narrations, because we see that several scholars who are, for example, members of the senior council of the senior scholars in Saudi Arabia, and other top university scholars in Saudi Arabia and others have authenticated the narration, and they have particularly mentioned that it's connected. And some random guy and Twitter guy comes and makes such objections. It does not have any weight to it. But in any case, we deal with with this assumption that let's take this objection seriously and see what's the status of Aslam, and how they deal with these narrations, and also how the narrations of a person in his position is dealt with in the Sunni scholarship. So we have here in the Ibn Hajar in his book Al-Isaba fi Tamyiz al-Sahaba, he mentions in volume 1, page 130, in the biography of Aslam, the slave of Umar, he says that Ibn Manda has narrated from Abdul Mun'im ibn Bashir, from Abdurrahman ibn Zayd ibn Aslam, from his father Zayd ibn Aslam, from his father Aslam, that he said that he accompanied the Messenger of Allah, the Prophet, in 2 journeys. So according to this narration, which is from the son of from Aslam himself, through his son, through his grandson, he claims that he has accompanied the Prophet in 2 journeys. And Ibn Hajar then says, "Well, Maru'f and Umar ashtara Aslam ba'da wafat al-Nabi." And he says, but the famous opinion is that Umar bought him as a slave after the Prophet. So this is where the objection of this individual comes from, that since Umar bought him after the death of the Prophet, particularly in year 12, which is a year or so after the incident that happened at Saqif and so on. So he says that he cannot be then an eyewitness. So we see that according to Ibn Hajar, there are 2 opinions. That one is that he accompanied the Prophet in 2 journeys. That means he is a companion of the Prophet. And Ibn Ishaq, however, as said that he was bought after the Prophet in year 12 during Hajj, when Omar was leading Hajj expedition of Muslims. So let's see the status of Aslam in other books. Here we have Ibn Abi Hatim in his book Al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, in volume 2, page 306. He says, Aslam, slave of Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Khalid al-Madini, كان من سبي اليمن، سمع أبا بكر وعمر روي عنه ابنه زيد والقاسم بن محمد ومحمد بن مسلم بن جندب سمعت أبي يقول ذلك. He says that Aslam, slave of Umar ibn al-Khattab, he was of the captives of Yemen, and he has heard narrations from Abu Bakr and Umar. So he's considered from the greater of the Tabi'un, who has heard from Abu Bakr and Umar, who were considered Tabi'un, or the generation who came after the companions of the Prophet. So the first generation of them are those who have narrated from Abu Bakr and Umar, and the companions after them. So That's what they say about these tabi'in. The ones who came later and met the later companions who lived longer or were younger at the time of the Prophet, those are considered then from the middle age, middle kind of tabi'in, and then later the minor tabi'in. These are their terminologies for them. So he says that Aslam was from among the captives of Yemen, which right now we do not need to discuss this any further. Maybe in future shows, maybe. But he also says, Ibn Abi Hatim says that Abu Zar'a, one of their very famous scholars, was asked about Aslam, slave of Umar. So he says he is from Medina, thiqa, which means trustworthy. He's a trustworthy scholar. Also, we have another scholar, the famous Ibn Hajar. In his book Taqrib al-Tahzib, he says Aslam al-Adawi. He's a slave of Umar. He's trustworthy. Mukhazram. Mukhazram means that those people who have lived also during the time of Jahiliyyah. So they have experienced or were born during the time of Jahiliyyah and also during the time of Islam. So they have experienced both eras, so to speak. And they have a special terminology for these people, which is Mukhazram. And he says he passed away year 80, and he says and also said that he is passed away after year 60. And he says, and he was at the age of 114 when he passed away. And all the 6 major books of them have narrated from him, referring to Bukhari, Muslim, and the 4 Sunan. So we see here that Aslam has both experienced the time of Jahiliyyah and also the time of Islam, which means at the time of Saqifa, what the incidents at Saqifa, he was a grown-up man. So he was not a minor age person or someone who was born later. So his age at this time was of a grown-up man. This is in Taqrib al-Tahzib, as I said, page 44, number 406. We have, let's see now the status of tabi'in, of the kibar al-tabi'in, as they say, the greater of the tabi'in, and also the other criteria that they have for disconnected narrations. Let's assume this narration is disconnected, then what? Here we have Ibn Ashur, a very famous Maliki scholar. He says in his book Kashf al-Mughatti, page 30 and 31 and 32, he says that ومن مراسل التابعين نوع لا خلاف في جعله كالمسند. He says, from among the disconnected narrations of the tabi'in, there is a kind about which there is no disagreement that they are considered like musnad, like connected narrations. So they are disconnected narrations, but they are considered like they are dealt with like exactly like connected narrations. So they have the same status in terms of authenticity. And he says, and this kind, وهو أن يحدث التابعي أن صحابيا ممن أدركهم قال لرسول الله كذا. He says, and this kind is that which the tabi says, for example, that the companion so and so, whom they have met, so to speak, these tabis, said something to the Messenger of Allah, said to the Messenger of Allah so and so. So, meaning that the tabi actually does not mention that he has taken this narration from the companion. He just mentions the story that this companion had with the Prophet or said something to the Prophet without mentioning that he has heard it from the companion directly. So he says that Ibn Ashur says that there is no disagreement about this type, that this type of disconnected narrations is accepted as musnad, as connected narrations. So there's no disagreement about this. So if we see in this narration that we have about Aslam, about this incident, we see that he does not even narrate from the Prophet. He just narrates a story from the Umar itself, Umar himself. So in this case, we can say there's no disagreement about among their scholars that this narration, according to their standards, as Ibn Ashur says, is a musnad, is a connected narration. There's no disagreement about it. This is with the assumption that Aslam was a tabi'i. So because we have seen that there's disagreement, that there's another report that says he accompanied the Prophet in 2 journeys. So in any case, if we accept him as a tabi'i, then his narration, disconnected narration, is considered musnad because he directly narrates from the companion whom he actually is, who is his master. So he's accompanying Umar all his life. So he knows everything about Umar. So if he narrates something about Umar and what happened and so on, he, of course, the assumption is that he has taken it, of course, from his master, because his master, Umar, was involved in this story. So, and he says that, Ibn Ashur then continues and says, فَهَذَا لَهُ حُكْمُ قَوْلِهِ إِنَّ الصَّحَابِيَّ أَخْبَرَنِي بِكَذَا. So he says, this kind of report is the same like if you say the companion, if the tabi says that the companion told me that he told the Prophet and so on, so on. So there's no difference between these two types. Then he says, as about those scholars who just accept narrations of tabi'in who are trustworthy, he says for them, for those scholars, they considered such mursal as sahih. So there's no difference for them between disconnected narration of a trustworthy tabi and a sahih narration. So it's also the same thing. So this second rule also applies to narration of mursal, aslam, if we take. So according to the second passage, also the second group of scholars, it's also authentic, the narration that we are talking about. Now we go on further. And he then says, وإلى هذا كان يذهب مالك ومشايخه وأبو حنيفة والترمذي ومحمد بن جرير الطبري ومحققو المالكية. He says that this is the method of or the madhab of Malik, that Malik accepted the marasil of a trustworthy tabi'i. And also he says this is his madhab, and also his teachers, Malik's teachers, and also Abu Hanifa's and Tirmizi's, and also Tabari's, and also the other Maliki scholars, he says. And he says then Abu Amr ibn Abdul Barr has narrated said in Tamhid from quoted from Tabari, who said أن التابعين بأسرهم أجمعوا على قبول المرسل. The Tabari said that all of the tabi'in, all of them are agreed upon to accept mursal narrations. So all of the tabi'in themselves, they accepted mursal narrations. We have now a very early generation, actually the generation who met the companions, they themselves considered disconnected narrations to be acceptable. Tabari says that we have no reports from them that they disliked or rejected the disconnected narrations, mursal narrations. ولا أن أحد من الأئمة بعدهم إلى رأس المئتين. He says, and we have not received any rejection of mursal narrations from any of the imams after tabi'in until the year 200. So until the year 200 Hijri, mursal narrations were acceptable among their scholars. what happened at the year 200? Then Ibn Abdul Bar, Abu Umar then says that it seems that At-Tabari is referring to Shafi'i, because Shafi'i was the first who refused to accept Mursal narrations and graded Mursal narrations a degree lower than the Sahih narrations. Shafi'i did. So he was the first one who came up with the idea that Mursal narrations are not acceptable. And he then says, upon this statement, upon this opinion, are Shafi'i and all of the, or the majority of the scholars of Hadith after him, so to speak. So, and he says that this is something that Muslim narrates in his Sahih from these scholars, that they rejected after Shafi'i, then they rejected the Mursal narrations. And he says that this is, of course, something that needs a bit more further discussion. It's just a terminology, but he says, but Shafi'i himself has some criteria. He does not reject completely disconnected narrations. He has some criteria. What is his criteria? Then he mentions that Shafi'i says, in kana tabi'i al-mursal من كبار التابعين لم يدرك إلا الصحابة مثل سيد بن المسيب فمراسله مقبولة ولها حكم الصحيح. He says that the Shafi'i had this put this criteria that the disconnected narrations of a tabi'i, if the tabi'i himself is from the kibar, is from the greater tabi'i, from those who have narrated, who have seen, met Abu Bakr and Umar and so on, and other companions. So the earliest companions who passed away right after the Prophet, like Abu Bakr, who passed away like 2 years after the Prophet, and so on. So these tabi'in are considered, as I said, from the kibar, from the greater. And Aslam was, of course, as we mentioned, from the greater tabi'in. Actually, he was even greater than that, because he was a mukhazram, which means he was a grown man. He had witnessed, lived, or was born during the time of Jahiliyyah. So he's even a step further than this. Shafi'i says that if the mursal comes from the greater tabi'in, who have not met or have not been given narration to accept from companions like Sayyid ibn Musayyib. For example, many of their scholars, they say that Sa'id ibn Musayyib, his disconnected narrations, mursal narrations are acceptable. Why? Because he narrates from the companions. Most of his teachers are companions of the Prophet. So that's why they accept his mursal. And Shafi'i says, وَلَهَا حُكْمُ الصَّحِيحِ, that this kind of disconnected narrations also have the same grade as Sahih. So they're Sahih chains. So according to this criteria of Shafi'i, which is a bit strict to the scholars previous to him, it applies also to Aslam. Why? Because he is from the Kibar Tabi'in. He is directly actually slave of Umar, who from whom he narrates this incident. If we take that he was not a companion, was not an eyewitness. So according to Shafi'i's criteria, this narration of Aslam is also Sahih. So and then Ibn Ashur then continues and says, إن اتفاقهم على قبول مراسيل الصحابة إنما هو لأجل عدالتهم. So he says that the agreement of the scholars upon accepting the disconnected narrations of companions themselves is because they are upright. So the reason that they accept the mursal narrations of the companions themselves, for example, a companion narrates a narration without saying that he has heard it from the Prophet. They by default accept this narration. Why? Because they say a companion is upright. He is adil. He does not lie. So that's why they accept it. And Ibn Ashur then argues, then why shouldn't we accept the disconnected narrations of others? They are upright. They are trustworthy. So the same rule applies also to the Tabi'in then. So why shouldn't we accept the disconnected narrations of Tabi'in? So here we had generations of their scholars from the earliest to the time of Shafi and then later until now, we see to all these criteria that they put for the mursal to accept them as sahih, the narration of Aslam fulfills every single one of them. So according to each one of these criteria that Ibn Ashur mentions, the narration of Aslam is sahih. As we saw the authentication of their scholars, Sayyid Ali read just before. So there's no doubt about it. So even if we say Aslam was not an eyewitness, his narration is completely 100% authentic. Also, we have another in explanation of why, for example, this criteria of Shafi is what does it mean? Why he puts this criteria that only the kibar, the greater tabi'in, their mursal narrations are acceptable. Here we have another book, Al-Amal al-Salih by Sami Muhammad. He says that he discussing the types of narrations. He says that when a tabi narrates from a tabi, from a sahabi, from the prophet, and sometimes it's a second tabi, he then drops the name of the first tabi from whom he has narrated, from the companion, from the prophet, from the chain, and directly narrates the narration from the prophet. He says this type. He says for this type, the importance of the criteria that Shafi put for accepting mursal narrations indicates itself. Why? Because Shafi says that the mursal of only the kibar, the greater tabi'in, is acceptable. And then the author of this book then argues that why this criteria is put. He says لأن أكثر مشايخ كبار التابعين هم الصحابة. He says because he just puts the criteria that only the mursal narrations of greater tabi'in is acceptable because most of their teachers, most of their mashayikh were companions of the Prophet. In contrary to the minor companions or to the minor tabi'in or younger tabi'in, whose narration, whose teachers were who were the greater tabi'in, and just they have met just some 1, 2, 3 of the companions of the Prophet. So the majority of their teachers then were the greater tabi'in. So this is why he says that it's important to accept the greater tabi'in's disconnected narrations, but not the younger ones, because most of their teachers were Sahaba. So according to this criteria, as we have explained, Aslam's narration is at the top of this chain, at the top of this list. So according to every criteria that they put to accept mursal narrations, the narration of Aslam fulfills it. Actually, we see that's why we see a lot of mursal narrations from Zayd, from the Prophet even, not from Umar, but actually from the Prophet. For example, here we have Sahih Sunan Tirmizi by Albani. Albani, he himself, authentic Isman narration, which Zayd ibn Aslam from his father Aslam from the Prophet, narrates from the Prophet, and does not mention Umar. Actually, a previous narration mentions that Abdul Razak, one of the sub-narrators, sometimes usually at the beginning, actually, he used to narrate from Aslam directly from the Prophet. Later, he added, their scholars say that he added that this narration is actually from Aslam, from Umar, from Prophet, according to his own assumption, whatever. So in any case, there are scholars like Tirmizi, and also here we have Albani have authenticated this narration. So it's not a surprise, because we saw that their criteria, according to the criteria that they have for mursal narrations, this fulfills no problem. We have here another one from Tirmizi, also from Zayd ibn Aslam, in volume 1, page 264. And in this narration also, Zayd ibn Aslam, actually Abdullah ibn Zayd ibn Aslam from Zayd ibn Aslam, not from Aslam himself, but from his son, directly narrates from the Prophet. So there are at least 3 people which are missing from the chain. So if we say that Aslam was a Tabi'i, of course. Then Tirmidhi himself says that وهذا أصح من الحديث الأول. He says this is more authentic than the first narration that he narrates with a connected chain. So he actually prefers a disconnected chain over a connected chain. It's interesting. And also we see the same thing in Bukhari, for example. In Bukhari also we have Zayd ibn Aslam, Malik actually, Malik the famous Imam of the Maliki school, from Zayd ibn Aslam, narrates from Zayd ibn Aslam from his father from the Prophet, without mentioning from Umar or from any other companion that he has taken the narration. So it directly narrates from the Prophet. And we have Brother Said Zaidi in previous shows also mentioned that that this particular narration is considered connected by their scholars, like Ibn Hajar and so. And I heard they have made a very funny excuse that this narration, Bukhari accepted it because Ahmed Ibn Hanbal in his Musnad has narrated this particular narration through another narrator, which is Abu Nuh. Ahmed ibn Hanbal narrates from Abu Nuh, from Malik, from Zayd ibn Aslam, from his father Aslam, from Umar ibn Khattab, from the Prophet. So is in Musnad Ahmed's chain, there is Umar ibn al-Khattab in the chain.
However, we demonstrated that the exact same report can be found in another source, in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed with a connected chain through the path of Qurad bin Nuh, which explains why Bukhari deemed that report authentic. When we take a look in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed, we find this hadith through the path of Qurad from Malik, from Zayd ibn Aslam, from his father Aslam, where he clearly mentions that he heard this from Umar.
So he says Bukhari apparently has accepted this narration because Ahmed ibn Hanbal had a connected chain for it. So, which is ridiculous, because why then he didn't include that narration in his Sahih and that chain in his Sahih and narrated this disconnected one. So it doesn't make any sense. A very silly argument. In any case, with this criteria, with this argument that they put, for example, we can say the same thing about narration of Aslam. We see that, for example, this particular narration in Mustadrak al-Mustadrak al-Sahihain of al-Hakim al-Nashapuri, he narrates this narration with Umar in the chain. So if you say that, yeah, the narration of Aslam from the Prophet in Bukhari is acceptable because Musnad Ahmad has a complete chain with Umar in the chain, we can say the same thing, that in Al-Mustadrak Sahin we have this, for this particular narration in the chain, Umar ibn Khattab also is mentioned. So, and they have made actually objected against this narration, that some of the narrators of this narration in Al-Mustadrak, which is volume 3, page 168, that some of the narrators are unknown or so, or weak, whatever. But let's see. So we have this narration. He narrates, Al-Hakim narrates from Mukrim ibn Ahmed al-Qadhi, from Ahmed ibn Yusuf al-Hamdani, from Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali al-Zahfarani, from Abdul Salam ibn Harb, from Ubaydullah ibn Umar, from Zayd ibn Aslam, from his father Aslam, from Umar, that he entered upon Fatima Salamat alayha and the rest of the narration. Actually, let's read, because this is important, because it's only narrates just part of the narration. It says that Umar entered upon Fatima bint Rasulullah, Fatima the daughter of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, and said, Umar said, Ya Fatima, Wallah ma ra'aytu ahadan ahabbu illa Rasulullah minki. That Umar said, O Fatima, by Allah, I have not seen anyone more dear to the Messenger of Allah than you. Wallah ma kana ahadun min an-nas ba'da abiki ahabbu ilayya minki. And he says, by Allah, no one after the Messenger of Allah is more dear to me than you. And the narration stops there. And then Al-Hakim says, هذا حديث صحيح الإسناد على شرط الشيخين من لم يخرجه. So the entire thing at the beginning of narration, as we saw in the narration of Ibn Abi Shaybah with Saqifa and Omar and Abu Zubair and Ali alayhi salam in the house of Fatima, and burning, threat to burning, and so on. It's completely missing. The only part is that Omar says, yeah, you're dear to me like you was dear to the Messenger of Allah. And then it's all funny because Dhahabi, another scholar who comments on these gradings of Al-Hakim, he says in the as you see in the footnote, he says gharibun ajib. He says this is weird. Basically, he says what the hell, because he knows that that in this narration the actual thing, the actual context of the narration is completely gone. The narration is completely taken out of the context. It just has some good positive things, and the entire threat thing with burning and stuff like that is completely gone. So Zahabi says very weird, very gharibun ajib. So we saw that they had from very early time they had to play with this narration. So with the content, they were playing with the words, as Sayyid Ali mentioned. For example, the direct student of Ibn Abi Shaybah removes some things or changes some things, and here we have Al-Hakim or some of his teachers in this chain have removed things, and just a positive thing remained, and so on. And we will see more examples of this kind of approach.
As you can see, the full report is not mentioned, but more importantly, we find in the chain of that narration Ahmed bin Yusuf al-Hamadani, who is unknown, and also Abdul Mu'min bin Ali, who we do not have much information on. So there is a possibility that either one of them made a mistake.
As about the narrators of this chain in Al-Mustadrak, let's expose some more stuff about their scholars. So we have here Hasan al-Saqaf, who has written a book, very famous book actually, he just exposes Albani, the Salafi scholar. So he exposes the contradictions of Albani and his dishonest approach to authenticating and weakening of narrations. And about this particular narration of Al-Mustadrak, the author Hasan al-Saqaf says that Albani has objected about this narration and said that that Abdul Salam ibn Harb is weak, and is not actually weak, but has a weakness, and has taken the grading of Ibn Hajar from At-Taqrib, that he said he is trustworthy and hafiz, but he has some unacceptable narrations from Manakir, some Munkar narrations. And the second objection of Albani about this chain was that Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali al-Za'farani, Albani says that lam ara man wathaqahu tawthiqan sarihan. So that Albani claims that I have not seen anyone authenticate him explicitly, clearly. So Hasan al-Saqaf then responds to these objections and exposes Albani by saying that Albani actually contradicts himself about Abdul Salam, the first narrator about which he objected, and says that in his book of Dha'ifa, volume 3, page 129, he for another narration, but the same narrator, because the content of the narration was not problematic for him, so he says thiqatun hujja. This is a trustworthy narrator, Abdul Salam ibn Harb, and hujja, and as a proof, which means you can take his narrations as proof. They're evidence. You can act upon it. So it contradicts himself with this grading for this particular narration, you see. So, and then continues with other things that I don't want to mention because it gets too long. We just see that they play with this game of authenticating and weakening of narrations whenever they like and whenever they dislike. So when the content is okay for them, they somehow manage to authenticate a narrator, and some other times they find something against that narrator and to dismiss his narration. So it's just a gameplay, nothing more. And then about the second narrator, then Hassan al-Saqaf says that the objection of Albani saying that I haven't seen anyone to verify it or authenticated him directly or clearly. He says that if you had opened the book of Ibn Hibban, Thiqat of Ibn Hibban, which is the book about trustworthy narrators, you could see it. So it's there. Ibn Hibban has directly authenticated this narrator. So there's not, it's a lie to say that there is no one authenticated them directly. And then he adds also another reference for authenticating of Abdul Mu'min. He says that Ibn Abi Hatim in Al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, he narrates, he says that my father and Ali ibn al-Hussein ibn al-Junayd and Al-Fadl ibn Abbas, who is known as Bis-Sa'iq, have narrated from him. So these are three great scholars who have narrated from this particular narrator, and says that Ibn Abi Hatim says that narrated to me Abdurrahman from Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj al-Nayshaburi, the Muslim who has authored this Sahih book, Sahih Muslim, that he said, I asked about Quraib about Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali al-Razi, Fathna alayh. So Muslim asked his teacher about Quraib, about Abdul Mu'min, and his teacher of Muslim, praised them, which means authenticated them and said good things about them. So Athna alayh in this context means actually authenticating or weakening of narrators, because otherwise why Muslim who is a scholar of hadith, why I should ask something which is not related to narrating narration. So of course this is also a ta'dil, it's authenticating, verifying the narrator Abdul Mu'min as a trustworthy narrator. And Hassan al-Saqaf says despite these two direct authentications, we have also the likes of Abu Hatim al-Razi and Abu Quraib and also others who have verified his status, so have narrated from him. Shows that he was a great scholar. Actually, he was a trustworthy, reliable scholar, not like Albani claims. So we see that these two objections of Albani about this particular narration of a chain of narration of Al-Mustadrak is also wide. Another narrator, which is Ahmed Ibn Yusuf, and here we have, for example, Tafsir al-Tabari in the footnote. Muhaqqiq is Mahmoud Muhammad Shakir. He says about a particular narration in Tafsir al-Tabari, volume 16, page 452 to 453. In the footnote, it says Ahmed Ibn Yusuf al-Taghlibi al-Ahwal. He is Sheikh of Abi Ja'far al-Tabari, and he is a companion of the famous scholar Abi Ubaid al-Qasim ibn Salam. And he was actually very famous, one of the very famous companions of Abdul Salam, of Abi Ubaid. And he says, Thiqatun Ma'amun. He was trustworthy and also Ma'amun, which means very reliable. He mentions that he has this narrator repeats itself in more than one narration in this tafsir. And then he mentions that from this particular narrator, Ahmed Ibn Yusuf, Tabari narrates the books of Abi Ubaid. Abi Ubaid, who currently we have, for example, some books from him about Quran, about Nasikh and Mansukh and so on. These books, all the entire books have been narrated through this particular student to Tabari. So this is if you say this person is, for example, weak or so, all these narrations of Abi Ubaid and all other scholars to the books of Abi Ubaid will be just gone, because you are just discrediting the chain of narrators because of this person. We have also other scholars like Khatib al-Baghdadi. He says that Ahmed ibn Yusuf Abu Abdullah al-Taghlibi, and he says from among his narrators is Mukrim ibn Ahmed al-Qadhi, as we have seen, this particular narrator is also in the chain of Mustadrak, so the same narrator. And then he narrates from Ibn Kharash, Abdurrahman ibn Kharash, that he said Ahmed ibn Yusuf is trustworthy and very reliable, and also narrates from Abdullah ibn Ahmed ibn Hanbal, that he also said that Ahmed ibn Yusuf al-Taghlibi is trustworthy. With this, we see that the narration of al-Mustadrak is sahih, is nothing wrong with it, the chain of narrators. The content we saw that they have played with it, whoever, but the chain of narrators is sahih, and that chain of narrators is connected. Umar is also in the chain. So Aslam narrates from Umar directly. So this we can take according to the argument that they made about narration of Bukhari from Aslam, from Prophet, that they added Musnad Ahmad as a proof, as a support. We can do the same thing and add Al-Mustadrak as a proof for the chain of Ibn Abi Shaybah and others. So yeah, but this, I think we presented enough proofs that there's no objection about the narration of Aslam, that it's sahih according to every criteria, whether he was a companion or he was a tabi'i. Even if he was from the minor tabi'ins, according to the last narration, according to the chain of Al-Mustadrak, we can also authenticate in him. So there remains no objection about the chain. So with these things mentioned. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking so long.
Thank you, Sayyid Firdaus. Absolutely fascinating. So amongst contemporary and classical Sunni scholars, Aslam was either a companion of the Prophet or a foremost tabi'in. Either way, his mursal are accepted according to Sunni standards. So for Farid to be actually rejecting the reports based on the fact that either he wasn't a eyewitness or the narrations are weak, have both been absolutely refuted by the evidence that you and Sayyid Ali Imam have provided, and it's absolutely telling that the doctrine that the Sunnis have of hiding disputes amongst companions is taking this form today. So they would actually engage in active distortion of narrations and historical events to try and show that there was no strife amongst Sahaba. So with that, Sayyid Ali Imam, if I could come back to you, do you have any examples of any distortions that have taken place in this in such a way to try and achieve this nefarious objective that Sunni scholarship has?
There is no doubt that there's been all sorts of attempts to try to play games with this tradition. In fact, let me show you something even better, to what extent some of the scholars have actually gone in terms of trying to deny this event. So this is from a contemporary Salafi scholar called Dr. Salabi, who is a historian, interestingly enough. He's also a scholar and a politician from Libya originally. I think he was exiled during the time of Gaddafi when he was arrested, or he left Libya, and then he continued his education in Saudi Arabia. And at present, I believe he may be in Sudan. He wrote a book called Ali ibn Abi Talib, and it's been translated in English. It's available in English. The PDF is as well online. And on page 261 and 262 of this translation, he narrates the same tradition from Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah. We know this because if you refer to the original Arabic version of this book, he actually gives the quotation in the footnotes to say that it's taken from Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah. And he says it was narrated that Aslam said, it's the same report in Musannaf, when allegiance was sworn to Abu Bakr after the death of the Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, Ali and Zubair and Fatima went to consult with her. Ali and Zubair went to consult with Sayeda Fatima Al Zahra. News went to reach Umar, and he entered upon Fatima and said, "O daughter of the Messenger of Allah, no one in the world is dearer to us than you after your father." And he spoke to her. Look, it says, and he spoke to her. So there's not even a mention of a threat at this point. Then he goes, Ali and Zubair came to Fatima, and she said, "You may leave, may Allah guide you." The report here, you can see again, they've admitted what she said, how Sayeda Fatima Al Zahra had reacted to the threat made by Umar, how she was afraid, that she said, go hurry, go pledge allegiance and do not return. And it says they did not come back to her until they had sworn the oath of Abu Bakr, removing some of essentially the other accounts which we previously discussed. You can see how the passage from Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah itself, even though the author admits that he's taking it from there, has removed parts of the tradition from Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah. Then it carries on and he says something quite interesting. This is what's proven and sound in addition to the soundness of the chain of translation. It's in harmony with the spirit of that generation. Notice these words. It's in harmony with the spirit of that generation. So here you could see that this type of narrative is considered something more appealing to the Sunni ideology in terms of accepting this whole, dogma about Adala of the Sahaba. They have to believe in this concept, right? So they have to try to interpret these passages in their own way they want to, and also at the same time concealing their vices. And then he says, and the fact that Allah has praised them. Now on the next page, this gets even better. He says the Rafidas added to this report and added lies and falsehoods. They said that Umar said, if these people met with you, I'm going to burn this house down with them inside, because they want to divide the Muslims by delaying the oath of allegiance. Then he went out, and it was not long before they came back to her, and she said to them, do you know that Umar came to me and swore by Allah that if you do not return to this house, he would burn down with you inside? By Allah, be willful his oath, so leave and do not come back to me. So they did that and did not come back until they swore the oath of allegiance. So this particular passage, he said that this is something fabricated from the Shias. Amazing. He actually said this part is fabricated from the Shias, even though this is from the very same narration he's depended upon, in which he's actually presented this original passage to begin with. So this is from Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah, but this apparently is a something which has been fabricated, added by the Shias themselves. Amazing. So the type of deception that people like Farid have to do. Farid took it one step further by at least denying the incident outright, but this is another type of way of trying to deny the actual passage itself. He couldn't weaken it, so he had no choice but to say, oh well, this is something added by the Shias, which clearly it's not. So this is just another example of how they distorted this passage and this threat, and actually what happened on that particular event. Now we'll come to another report, and this is recorded in Tariq al-Baghdad by Khatib al-Baghdadi, and it's a slightly different chain, but it goes back to the same narrators as Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah, and once again Aslam from his father, who said that Umar said to me, O daughter of the Messenger of Allah, my most beloved is your father after him. And that's it. It stops there. This report has been authenticated by Dr. Bashar Awad al-Maru'f, and he says the hadith is sahih, and Ibn Abi Shaybah has narrated it. And then he says, and there's a story behind it, which we know what the story is, and perhaps this is the very reason why either the narrators of this particular tradition hid the rest of the details of the event, or the author of the book, Khatib al-Baghdadi, did, or perhaps even the publishers of this book itself decided to remove those reports in which these threats were made to Sayeda Fatima Al Zahra, and Sayeda Fatima showing her concerns, which she's saying to Imam Islam Zubair, do not return until you pledge allegiance. So yeah, this is another example of how they distort this narration, alongside the other narrations which we previously presented, and this report is authentic as well. It's so authentic that it's they have to resort to this type of deception where they have to hide the details. This next report is from Al-Istiyab by Ibn Abdul Barr, and it was one of the 3 points which Farid raised an objection about. Now, what's interesting is, even though Farid cited this passage, he said it was the same passage narrated in Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah. Now, technically, he is right to a certain degree. The only addition is that there's slight different narrators in this chain. Nevertheless, the content pretty much is identical. However, let's have a read of it. Let's have a read of this. Zayd ibn Aslam from his father Aslam, who said, Ali and Zubair began to frequently visit the house of Sayeda Fatima when Abu Bakr was given the Pledge of Allegiance and began to seek her advice. It reached Umar and he entered and he went to her and said, O daughter of the Messenger of Allah, none of the creation is more beloved to me than your father, and none after him, as much as you. If it reached me that those men continue to enter your house, I'll do it, this and that. I'll do it, this and that. Do what? What's going on here? Like, what? Do what? It says, if they enter your house, I'll do this and that. Why don't they just write it down? Why don't they just accept what's actually happened? But they can't, can they? Because it's a catch-22 situation. On one hand, they have to sanctify the personalities of the Sahaba, but at the same time, they're not allowed to narrate any events that go against them. But when they do, they have to distort it. They have to change it. And they have to try to deceive the masses into, making this whole fairy tale that, they lived as one big happy family. Then it carries on and it says, then they came to her and she said to them, Umar came to me and swore that if you return, he will certainly do, and by Allah, he will do it. He'll do what? And he will do it. Then it goes, then they left and didn't return till they pledged allegiance. So you can see the actual threat here has essentially been removed totally. We don't even know what the threat is. This is the report in Al-Istiyab, which Farid claimed that it's the same report from Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah. Perhaps it is, but then maybe he needs to explain to us why the threat has been removed from this report. So this is in volume 4, page number 222 to 223. And last but not least, this is from Fadail al-Sahaba, volume 1, page number 445, hadith number 532. This is from Ahmed Ibn Hanbal, and he's narrated with a slight difference in the variation of narrators, but essentially it goes back into the tradition, the narrators of Musannaf ibn Abi Shaybah. And he's narrated from Zayd ibn Aslam, from his father, who said, when the allegiance was sworn to Abu Bakr, after the death of the Holy Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, Ali and Zubair went to Fatima to consult with her. News of that reached Umar, and he entered upon Fatima and said, O daughter of the Messenger of Allah, no one is in the world is dearer to us than you, your father, and no one after your father is dearer to us than you. And he spoke to her. That's it. No threat, no nothing. He just spoke to her. Ali and Zubair came to Fatima, and she said, you may leave. May Allah guide you. They did not come back to her until they had sworn their oath to Abu Bakr. The annotator for this hadith, Waliullah Ahmed, says the chain is reliable except Muhammad ibn Ibrahim. Essentially, this is pretty much the same chain mentioned in Musannaf ibn Abi Shaybah. It's all reliable narrators except one particular individual, Muhammad ibn Ibrahim. So you can see here the type of censorship that's involved when it comes to this particular event, which has been documented in multiple Sunni hadith books, and numerous scholars have attested to it, and numerous historians have attested to it, and it's also located in major hadith collections like Musannaf ibn Abi Shaybah. And as you can see, Nazim Kazmi, they have distorted this narration in many, many different ways. They've tried to conceal this event, tried to hide it. Some have even denied it and tried to claim that it's Shias who fabricated it. So you can see why people like Farid have to mislead his cheerleaders into believing that this event never occurred, and this report is, it's not authentic. Because individuals like Aslam were not there. So yes, Sayyidina Shah, I'll pass it back to you, inshallah ta'ala, and I'll let you finish off.
Thank you, Sayyid Ali Imam. An absolute eye-opener. Both heartbreaking and revealing at the same time that people who are entrusted with putting forward a credible and educated position will go to these extents to cover up the misdoings and misdeeds of their idols, their historical idols, their religious idols. Dear viewers, this is a direct appeal to your intellects. You've been following these shows. This is the 4th show in the series. We've shown that Sahih Shia hadiths exist on this matter. We've refuted the objections raised towards Iqdal Farid. and the report contained within there. We've refuted the objection to the reliability of the reports in Tarikh al-Tabri and Riyaz al-Nadra. And today we have hopefully dispelled the confusion and doubts raised by Farid Bahraini and other like-minded people as to the authenticity and the reliability of the reports in Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah. It's now for you to make that decision and decide and come to a conclusion as to where the truth lies. We can provide you with the evidence. We can't force a conclusion on you. Before you reach a conclusion, please do bear in mind, as discussed today by the brothers, that within the realm of Sunni academia and Sunni reporting, there is an active and conscious decision to try and to distort the events that have occurred due to an ideological belief which has nothing to do with factual evidence, which has nothing to do with Islamic tenets, but has to do with this desire to support and promote religious idols. Now, if somebody is being genuine and honest, I believe there's only one conclusion. It's for you to decide whether Sunni academia has actively tried to distort the events that took place and hide or brush under the carpet certain important key factors as to what has happened, and to try and show some companions in a positive light when actually their actions should be condemned. If you do not believe the brothers who have taken the time and effort to put this together and to provide you with this evidence, take the references to your scholars of choice, and make sure they are scholars, not people like Farid who will lie and deceive without hesitation to try and prove their point. But take it to a scholar, show them the reference, and ask them directly, look you in the eyes and tell you whether what has been stated is correct or not. I leave it to you, brothers and sisters, to find the truth, and inshallah you will find the truth. But from everyone at Baitul Ghadir, I bid you farewell for today, and we will see you soon. Allah Hafiz.